Good day. I'm Chris Hubert from the Center of Sexualities, AIDS and Gender. I'm a project manager for the Just Leaders Project, and today we're going to be talking about several topics related to the Trans Day of Remembrance. The theme this year would be Lives Remembered and Futures Reclaimed. Something I do just want to stress is there might be quite a few topics that we do talk about that could be very personal, and because of that, I would just like to start off with a trigger warning. Thankfully, though, to keep this conversation as nuanced as possible, we are joined by several key stakeholders, such as the university's Transformation Office, Gender Dynamics, and also a local student society, Up and Out. Thank you, and please enjoy the conversation.
Hello. Hi. So we're just gonna ask a few questions, but before we get to that, I would just like to know your names, pronouns, organization that you work for, anything else that you'd like to tell us.
Thank you very much. I'm Chris. I'm a co-project manager at the Center for Sexualities, AIDS and Gender. The project I manage with my colleague is the Just Leaders Project.
Hello, I'm Farado Matsira. I'm a researcher at the Center for Sexuality, Sex and Gender, and also co-project manager of CRIS. Our goal is to create safe and inclusive spaces within universities across Southern Africa.
Hello, I am Wurisani Korombi. I work at the Transformation Office. My pronouns are she, her, and my role officially is Specialist Student Capacity Building.
I forgot pronouns, but I'm she, her.
I don't mind. You may use any pronouns.
And hello everybody, I'm Flynn Duda and I use he, him pronouns. I am also the Transformation Officer of Up and Out, the official queer society at the University of Pretoria. Okay. So one of my first questions would probably be if I can just address one of you at this time, and then obviously across you will answer. So Chris, one of my questions is, what do you think the impact of recent hate crimes and past attacks against or on trans people says about our social climate in regards to gender-based violence, murder, assault, along with the fact that it is not taken as seriously as it should be?
Yeah, that's quite an intense one. I think the impact kind of speaks to the sort of dehumanization that happens when these sorts of attacks and violence happen. Often we have these conversations and we don't realize the culture of acceptance that we have. And I mean, it goes from anything from those conversations of, yes, obviously I'm not saying this is okay, but if you are going to be looking like this or wearing this or whatever at this point in time, then maybe you should expect some level of violence or something. And I think that becomes very dangerous because what we're essentially saying is, I think violence is wrong, or I think GBV is wrong, unless, of course, you're being attacked after 1 o'clock outside. And I think it goes deeper than when we say even above that, this type of violence is deplorable. We'll have our days against it. But then when we find out the gender identity or the sexuality of the victim, we start to think, well, I'm no longer as concerned about it, which I think is a way of just sort of emphasizing that there's a real problem we have with these types of violence, and whether or not taking it seriously rather starts to really give a impression to people who belong to those groups that they indeed are not seen as equal to their brothers and sisters who maybe there is a march for, or there is outrage in their communities. But when it is them, it's rather something that needs to be shamefully hidden away or not brought to the attention because, yes, you were attacked. But we'd also like for people to not know there's this person within our family. And I think that really, it speaks to people not only being scared and fearful for their life, which I think is common for a lot of South Africans, but on top of that, not just being scared, but not even being seen as a person who's just experiencing violence, but almost seen as a person who violence is to some degree allowed to because they are outside of the quote-unquote norm.
Thanks for that. Then can I just also ask the same from you, Farila?
I think Chris has already said a mouthful, but I'll just like to also reflect on GBV as a phenomena that we continuously engaging with. Now we are actually approaching the 16 days of activism, and I've noticed that, as you've said, Chris, there's erasure of humanity when it comes to trans people. We have made GBV synonymous with just women, even though they are cis women, to be specific. Which means that anyone that falls outside of that specified norm, their experiences are not validated, or they are not seen as worthy to get justice. And I think one of the greatest contributors is because as a society, we don't know how to deal with difference, but also we're not open to learning about difference and embracing difference as part of our humanity. So everything that is different, there's this need to rush to erase it out of our everyday reality. Therefore, even their lived experiences are silenced or pushed to the margins. Thank you.
Okay, and then we're just going to wrap it up with Hulisani and then ask another question. Thank you so much.
What can I say that my colleagues have not already said, right? And so perhaps I want to go back to how underreported cases are of GBV, of hate crimes. They're already underreported, right? And we know this because of how the police system works in South Africa, right? And how cases are already not taken seriously, even if they fall within what is supposed the norm. And so for you to be not in the norm of what society might think, then makes you less likely to go to the police station, to go and seek for help, because you know that you're not going to receive any help, right? And so I think the first thing there is that we actually don't know the extent to which the crimes have been happening because of the underreporting. And so once we are able to get accurate data, it would actually maybe perhaps look worse and we'd be worse off. But yes, this impact is quite bad. What I think that does happen quite often is because we live on our phones and we live on the internet, we often see cases that are being reported that are not in our backyard, right? We see a lot of things that are happening in the United States because that is where social media content comes from a lot on our feeds. And so we almost get outraged for people that are not, our neighbors, and we will rally for them. But when this same harm occurs to somebody that we might know, we're not on the streets rallying for them, right? And so I think that's also a big problem that we're facing currently, is that we don't know our neighbors and we're not offering support right to the person who's right near us. We should offer support to people as a globalization, right? We should obviously offer support. The community is large and we should offer support to everybody, but also just thinking more clearly about how do we offer support to people who are right next door to us as well.
Okay, thank you so much. My next question then is obviously kind of linked to the first one, which is there's a rise of the anti-rights movement along with the anti-intellectualism movement using and also implementing policies that are targeted to strip away the rights of queer people, especially trans people. And it's very much localized in the States, but I think one thing we don't really recognize is the impact that it has on the local surroundings that we have. And I think one thing we also need to analyze is kind of the tactics that are used, such as political scapegoating. So my question is, when political scapegoating is used to kind of absolve politicians from acting their civil duties, what is it then that the public should do?
Does anyone want to go first, or?
Thank you for that question. I think I like it because we were actually attending a session with Chris on queer litigation hosted by the Center for Human Rights, University of Pretoria. And it was one of the questions to say, some of the worst experiences have been that partner organizations that we work with as the Center for Sexualities have lost their funding. And the question was, how do we continue to do this meaningful work and create safe spaces within not just universities, but communities in general? And one sort of like recommendation was to think about finding sustainable funding solutions or monetary solutions to support the work that we do, and not solely rely on externally funded money. And I know, like, when we are expecting foreign donors and stuff like that, some of our politicians tend to fold their hands and, you know, absolve themselves of their responsibilities. But as communities, we need to start thinking about fundraising and saying, okay, the work that we're currently doing can't just be voluntary work. When you are facilitating a workshop on critical diversity, you need to charge that to raise funds so that we continue to do the work that we do. But also just challenging politicians themselves to say, when we are saying equality for all, what does that all really mean when we continue to silence already marginalized individuals? I think that's a challenge for them.
This is a very complicated question, and I think it has many layers, right? And so what I'm going to say is I think only one layer of it. So apart from what we're saying here about looking for external or other sort of funding mechanisms, is and I think this might come from the background that I have in law, and my background is always to hold people to account, right? And so if you say that you're going to do something and you don't do it, we should hold you to account because you've promised to do this thing. So even as a politician, I think that, you know, we as citizens who've put these people in place and put them in power, we need to equally hold them to account, to say, these were the promises that you made, these are the communities that you said that you were going to serve, and you haven't done that. And so what should we do? We should take that power back, right? We vote differently, we give other people a chance. They might not have the best options out there, but we give other people a chance to try to do those things. And I think it's important to mobilize specifically young people, because we're seeing how young people do not want to be involved in politics, right? And they are just kind of being like, older people have messed it up for us, and we're just not going to deal with it, and we're not going to vote, and the number of people who don't vote is very, very problematic. So I think I saw it recently there was a government was trying to say that your debt that you have accumulated for your university career should also be added to your credit score, or against your credit score, if I'm not mistaken. And young people and other people or alike were able to rally, and, you know, they had that petition that said, we're not doing that. That is not going to happen. And almost within the space of less than a month, I think, right, that had been overturned. And that shows the ability to say, we will hold you to account for doing things that are not serving us, right? And if we would just have that mindset, we would be able to then really, really not rely necessarily on external funding, or just be able to depend on our government, not to just try to scapegoat and say, we're not going to do this. Because if we don't hold them to account, they can consistently just say, well, nobody has ever held us to account, so we don't have to do anything that we said we've done. So one of the layers is just holding people to account, I think.
To just add, because I think those pretty much were all the points, but I think an important thing to also realize, maybe with regards to not just what people should do who maybe fall or who feel they fall under the umbrella of those rights, or who are being scapegoated too, but mindful for those who maybe, quote unquote, might be benefiting from the scapegoating, to not have to take on the responsibility, is a reminder that human rights is a very slippery slope. And right now you might see the scapegoating as, there's a group I do not belong to and their rights are being removed. But we forget that these human rights, at the end of the day, might have been made consciously for one group, but end up benefiting everyone. So I think we see it in real time right now, where there were people who voted for certain anti-rights policies within the states, who are now creating these social media posts where there are farmers who are saying, I didn't think they meant me. or people who are saying, I wanted to get rid of DEI and forgetting that, oh, I was thinking of queer people. I forgot that as a woman occupying this, as a cis woman occupying this position, I originally was part of the DEI as well. Or I might be thinking about queer people, but forgetting the fact that as a person of color, I benefited from DEI. So I think oftentimes a reminder is you would think these sorts of scapegoating tactics won't ever affect you, but it will be this thing now. And if that is successful, the next thing will be centered around race or economic class or disability. And that is something to be mindful of, that when you hear the scapegoating tactic, as my colleagues have put it, keep people to account, because if you let it go now, likely sooner or later you're going to be next.
Oh, that was a lot. I would say that obviously the most important thing is, as the youth, be empowered, go there and fight for your rights. I think don't just think it ends and starts with you, or it ends and starts with another person. You are part of the fabric that you live in, and you have to then also be accountable as well. So if you're not fighting for your rights, then it's not only the politicians at fault, it's not only the elders at fault, it's you as well that have to hold yourself accountable. One of my other questions more is actually just how these ideas aren't really like saturated, or they're not stuck on the academic area or battlefield anymore. They're outwardly, it's not like we're just talking about communism or socialism and stuff like that, and it's just like a buzzword or terminology. How is it these ideas are now manifesting in the like real time?
Just to clarify, by ideas, you mean the anti-rights, anti-gender ideas?
Ideas more like ideologies, not just about anti-rights, but ideologies like Christian nationalism, like communism, capitalism. How are these kind of like factors not like isolated by ideas alone? They're actually showing in the real world.
Okay. Well, I think we often do have the luxury to often say the luxury of privilege when things don't affect you, to only think about it intellectually, to maybe go to a sociology class and hear about different forms of economic powers and stuff, or go to maybe even a pride event and hear about different sexualities or different gender identities. And I think that's often the reason why people say, but in the past this wasn't a thing, is forgetting that these things are not just topics. They have always been part of the real world and will continue to affect it. What you're experiencing now is consciousness of the topic. So I think it's one thing to learn about, say, what is gender, what is the difference between gender and sex, what is the difference between gender, sex, and sexuality, and the difference between your sexual orientation and who you actually end up having sex with is very great to learn in terms of a sort of educational topic. But in reality, these things have always been part of our natural lives. And I think we often try to say that, how does this thing that is very comfortably just a topic maybe, or even very comfortably something I do personally, like when we talk about Christian nationalism and stuff, maybe your faith in something is something very great to you, and by all means that should be the case, but there should be a conscious reminder that you can enjoy something and still be critical about it. You can enjoy capitalism and still go, but what safeguards need to be there so that this doesn't become overly corruptive? By no means do I think anything will ever be perfect, and that's hence I'm not here to play down anyone's desired economic policies or play down anyone's religion or anything like that. But I do think that if a religion or if a thing is meant to be relatively useful, it should be a net positive, which means that if we start saying this works for all people, except if your gender identity is not cis, except if your sexuality is not heterosexual, except if your particular branch of religion isn't, because we say Christianity, but really we could look at very specific forms of Christianity that benefit. We start to realize there actually aren't any human rights. There are very niche people who benefit from things, and most people actually end up losing out. So I think that's maybe what I would say is the difference, is to start to really realize these aren't just concepts. These are daily things that people do have to deal with. It might be a concept to you because you are not from a particular group or don't realize that you fall under that umbrella, but it is a daily occurrence in someone else's life, in policy, and in history.
Yeah, I feel attacked. My background is in sociology, and I usually lecture some gender courses. And when I say I feel attacked, is because like Chris is talking about how it's easier to engage with something as just theoretical concepts. And I think what working at the center has afforded me is to be able to put, a face to a concept, a face to a scenario that we usually engage with in class. And one of the moments that actually challenged me was when we were engaging with learners from the schools that we work with. So we have a community engagement project within the Just Leaders where we engage with young learners from different schools across Pretoria. And so we brought them here and we were talking about comprehensive sexuality education, something that most parents are usually afraid of. They're like, no, don't teach our children about something like that. But what they don't understand is that we are not teaching them how to have sex. We are teaching them also how to navigate power dynamics within various relationships. They need to be able to name experiences when they happen to them or their friends. So it's about empowering them with knowledge. And I think during that session, about 2 learners started speaking about their own experiences of coming out within a school, being bullied, being followed to the bathrooms. And I'm sorry for I would like to add a trigger warning to that. And you start to realize that this is somebody's lived reality. It's not just a concept note. And if one is saying, okay, I'm a Christian, a challenge to us as Christians then is to say, if God truly is love, that child needs love, that child needs to be protected, and all the other kids need to be educated on how to accept difference. And I think that's one of the amazing challenges that I've had to encounter and interact with daily, and sort of like introspect about what it means to me as an advocate of social justice, but also what does it mean to me as a Christian, what does it mean to me as a theorist also, and putting all these things in practice. So I think that we need to really consciously engage in understanding our positionality when we engage with such things. So yeah, thanks for that.
So your question kind of surrounds about theory becoming this real-time thing, right? And I think one of the things that we often forget is how well-funded hate is, right? And how well-funded and how systematic it is. And so with that, the example that I came across recently was a trad Christian content creator who did blackface, right? And she did this thing, and then she does a non-apology, as usually happens, right? But in her non-apology, she speaks about how, and this talks about the systematicness of it, is how they know what they're doing, right? And they know that if I do blackface and the next person does blackface and the other person does blackface, people are so consistently enraged that they get fatigued, right? And so when somebody who's higher up than what an influencer might be, who has political power, does the same thing, we're already so fatigued by having to daily call people out that we no longer have the energy, we don't have the we don't have the energy to then also call out these people who are higher up, because even calling out people at our level didn't quite work. So you then think, But even if I call out this higher person, it's not going to work. And I think that's something that we forget about, how there is somebody systematic, or not even somebody, there's a system in place that is so well funded, that has done their research. They know the theory very well. They give snippets of the theory to people that they think that can, supercharge their agenda. And then we are enraged by these small little things, and we don't actually get to the root of the problem, right? And so the theory then becomes this real life big monster, or this big problem that we don't even know how to dismantle, right? And so I think it's very important for us also equally trying to get past this hate, or trying to resist against it, is for us to also equally know our theory, right? Because they really know their theory, and they really know how to hate really well, right? And so how do we know? What do we know about deconstructing? What do we know about this and this and this? Can we, at the tip of our fingers, name all of the stats that they like to name, right? Do we have a counter to what they're saying? When they say 1 in 3 XYZ does this and this and this, do we know the real stat, or do we just then try to resist against this person without having any good knowledge at all? So I understand the place of theory, but we also need to understand how well funded these things are, and how we are already at a back foot because we're not well funded when we're trying to do human rights work. We're not that well funded. And when we are funded, we might be funded by people whose politics we disagree with, right? And always having that way up of, do we need the money to do the good work, or are we going to stand on business and not take the money? Right? And so it's these very delicate balancing acts that you have to do when you're really trying to resist.
I think I love that when you said we need to know theories and the stats, because it was raised as well during the session. The person who works for International Amnesty, they were talking about how one thing that sort of like not killed us, but like made us be at the back when we talk about these movements, is that we thought, oh, it will just die down. Oh, it's just that one society. And then they started burning in intensity, and then raising and growing and growing. So she was saying that we need to constantly evolve as well, and stop undermining such initiatives.
My last question is gonna link into Trans Day of Remembrance, which is on the 20th of November, and it happens annually. And the importance of this day is the fact that a lot of trans people's lives were lost, either towards like murder, assault, hate crime, and also obviously the taking of their own lives. And I think one of my questions would be, with this in mind, how does this kind of impact the future for other trans people, but also trans youth that are losing ancestors and elders due to these violent attacks?
I think it's a very important question, especially within the context. I want to take it back to something I said earlier, where we often have this very comforting way of saying that in the past certain things were not there and this is a new phenomenon, but that is only successfully done through erasure. It is successfully done by people having to hide identities, having to only mention some of who they are, but not talk about who they are entirely. And I want to say that becomes a point of us having to bring back those voices that may have been lost. It comes to a point of us being more mindful that when I'm being harsh on teachers. If the day I teach, I'll look back and probably be like, yes, it wasn't that easy. But it comes with being very conscious about what historically has happened and not trying to run away or to scapegoat and say that, well, those were some people, but I wasn't part of that problem. Be conscious and be mindful of saying that there were mistakes I made, there were things I thought wasn't as important. And that can be very simple. I think a conscious change a lot of us have made is to just be more gender neutral in the language that we use. I mean, it takes getting used to, but really, like any habit, we adopt slang pretty quickly. I don't see how this would be something that is that difficult. With us, I know when we were doing our updates, we have a service that we provide here at the center where we train students to do HIV counseling and testing. And part of that is also to give a lot of counseling skills, not specifically related to testing, but related to all the things that are surrounded by someone wanting to do an HIV test. So their relationships, their experiences, possibly even a lot of the times their traumas. And a very critical thing we had to do is say that we have very binary language in our book that we use to teach people. Our language is very binary throughout the manual, but even when we come to scenarios, there's maybe one scenario that isn't a very heteronormative one. And that already becomes general erasure of the fact that we are here for everyone. But when we are teaching people, it seems that we are only teaching them to cater to a specific group. So that took, I think, almost a year of editing to change language literally sentence for sentence to make sure that this becomes something that is a lot more inclusive, but also opens up the conversation even within training to say some people may think this is new, but indeed there has been like countless events of people who need a specific service. These aren't new people. These are people who have always existed. And really, when you boil down to it, the counseling skills are the same. But to not throw you off and to not pretend that this is a community that doesn't exist, let's have scenarios where we are mindful of scenarios that people who are trans or people who are gender non-conforming might also be facing and how to better help them. So it takes what seems like a lot of conscious effort, but in hindsight, it just takes getting out of your comfort zone for 2 seconds.
This is such a great question. It reminds me of one of the big things that I like to do, which is record keeping, right? And so your question specifically deals with young people and the erasure of trans persons, but I think it's important even for older people who were not able to transition when they were younger, right? And so it's just a question of how do we then remember people, and that's record keeping. I think one of the big things that we always see when there's a war or hate crimes or things like that is the erasure of people by doing specific things. And so either destroying people's language or destroying their museums, destroying their culture, doing all of those things is very, very systematic. It's very, very intentional. The reason you do that is so that they don't have a place to go back to refer to when when maybe perhaps the war is over. Now you have to assimilate to whatever is there because you no longer have that culture that is recorded. So I think, yes, there is an attack on trans persons and people who are non-binary, and the way that we are going to really try to enable ourselves to get past that or to remember is to record, right? And that's within your daily life, within the struggles that people have as a trans person. Those stories are important, and there's never going to be enough, right? Because every single person is unique. And so even if I am a trans person and you are a trans person, we're all trans persons here, all of our stories are different. We could be identical twins and our stories would be different. And it's important for us to really record those, because someday somebody's going to come and say, I relate more to this person, right? And if you don't tell your story, and you're, not to say you have to be in the public eye, but just recording your story in some way or another. It could be on a private account, it could be on YouTube, it could be TikTok, it could be wherever, just living your life and not necessarily forward, like making it, I'm recording it because I'm a trans person, but just recording it because you're a person and you're just recording your life. Does another trans person who's younger than you stumble upon this and say, I look like this person, I'm dark skinned like this person, I'm fat like this person, you know, that then gives you some sense of belonging. So I think the most important thing in really trying to talk about Trans Day of Remembrance is record keeping and recording our stories. It's the most important thing.
I think my point, just to close off what my colleagues have already shared, is education. We really can't continue saying I didn't know better or I don't know about this thing. There's social media, there's the news, and as you're saying, the more you tell these stories, the more people can be educated. The reason why cis and heteronormative lived realities have become the norm in terms of everyday is because we are constantly bombarded by their stories. We're constantly bombarded by soapies and talk shows and stuff like that. So I think it's important that people also go out of their way, out of these traditional media platforms, and actually just get educated so that we can create safe and inclusive spaces for everyone.
Thanks everyone for answering. Also, obviously this is a very important recording, and I just hope that after all of this that people are not just engaging but are also connecting and relating. I think it's very important that we not only are just what some people would say a figurehead, but are actively doing the work, are actively speaking to the people and trying to actually create a culture of empathy, understanding, and just equality. So thank you so much. And also I'd like to thank all you guys for answering my questions. And that's it. Thank you so much.